everybody. This episode of the podcast is being sponsored by my friends over at Real Mushrooms, my friend Jeff Chilton and his son Sky. I interviewed Jeff on one of the earlier episodes of this podcast. Really happy that they're sponsoring this podcast. They sell medicinal mushrooms, things like reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. I think more and more people are becoming familiar with the truly amazing benefits of medicinal mushrooms on our physical, our mental, even our spiritual well-being. They're an amazing company. They're one of the few, if any, companies that's not only 100% organic, but 100% mushrooms, and that's really rare. A lot of companies have fillers or additives, or also important, it's not the mycelium that's grown on grain and mixed together, it's the actual mushroom, and that's a really rare thing. It's a really pure product. It's the only product, the medicinal mushroom product that I take. Super happy with them, super happy that they're sponsoring this podcast. If you'd like more information about them, you can check out their website at realmushrooms.com/universe to also receive 25% off of your first order. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Eva Hooft. Eva's a really interesting woman, and we had a really interesting, I think, and fulfilling conversation. We spoke about her background growing up, kind of some of the trials and tribulations she went through, her very unique journey into the world of modeling, and some of the things that brought up, and very much her healing journey, which, as we spoke about, led her to New York and to really begin to try all sorts of different modalities in this idea of holistic healing, kind of her journey with her gut issues, and many different things. And she has a really fascinating journey. We spoke about a lot of these modalities that I think have really become quite popular, and that she practices things like somatic therapy, mineral balancing, liver detoxification, really the power of the mind and belief systems. And it was a really fascinating conversation. I think her knowledge and wisdom, even though she's quite young, it's really, I think, shown the work she's done and the knowledge she's gathered. So I think this is a really great conversation and something you all can really learn a lot from. As always, if you're able to support the podcast, that's a really big help to me. As always, Patreon is a really amazing option. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's also tiers you can sign up for that give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. As always, thank you very much to the people supporting that way. And if you're able to, thank you very much in advance. And then, as always, helping with the algorithms. So if you're viewing this on YouTube, Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. All of those things really help with the algorithms. Also, we have an Instagram page that's we're using a lot more and becoming more popular. So if you're interested in staying up to date, you can follow us on Instagram, which is just simply my name, so at Jason Korchanik. And then finally, if you're interested in working with myself and my colleague Marav Artsy, we have our 2026 schedule calendar up now. As of now, we have a remote dieta coming up in January, a physical plant medicine dieta in the Sacred Valley of Peru. We're going to be in Ireland, back in Peru towards the end of the year. Probably a couple other dates and locations we'll add as well. As always, it's a really beautiful opportunity to go deeper into this healing work, these wisdom traditions. And if you'd like more information about that, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org, and there'll be a link to that in the show notes. So I think that's it for the intro, and without further ado, here is my conversation with Eva.
I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
So yeah, welcome. We just had a little bit of a technical issue, but yeah, just to start, you go by Eva or Ava?
I go by Ava.
Ava. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So perhaps some of my listeners are familiar with you. Maybe they've heard of you. I'm sure many haven't as well. So it's always a big question to start off the podcast. But if you can give a bit of background about yourself, who you are, where you come from, and you've had a really interesting life and the trajectory that you've been on to get you to where you are.
Yeah, like you said, I always try to find it hard to encapsulate that within a few minutes, but I'll try my best. So I originally grew up in the Netherlands, small town, obviously moved to the States when I was about 20 years old. And my childhood was very much filled with kind of like lots of like medical issues. I was born with like, chronic eczema. I had a lot of gut issues since I was a child, a lot of like, I wouldn't say like full learning disabilities, but I definitely didn't fit into the box of like, goes to school, has good grades, can kind of keep up with the rest of the kids. So there was always something going on that my parents couldn't really figure out. Thankfully, my parents were very alternative. So I was, rather than sent to like all the Western doctors, I was sent to like more of like the bioresonance and getting a lot of like alternative treatments, which was really beautiful when I was young. And it helped to an extent, but there was always just these things that kept coming back. So as a child, I was having lots of like vitamin, nutrient deficiencies, no matter what I would eat. Like I said, stomach issues, skin issues. And eventually it kind of got to this place where I was sick for about 2 years. So I was 14 years old. I got depressed. And right as I got depressed, my body just kind of gave up and I was bedridden for 2 years. And I was diagnosed with chronic CMV and CSV or CVS. So it was kind of like this natural unfolding of just like always being in doctor's offices and like always needing to run tests. I think I was doing labs like every 6 weeks. It was kind of ridiculous at that point. And there was just like always things coming up that, were worse than it was before, no matter how healthy I was eating. And what I didn't really know at the time is that like, obviously I was bullied my entire life, which has a massive impact on your physical body. So my physical body really responded to the environment not being safe. And as a response, right, it got sick so that I could stay home and didn't have to go to the environment in which I was bullied. And on top of that, my parents were also both smokers, they were drinkers, they had a lot of exposure to heavy metals, they both had amalgam or silver dental fillings. And I didn't really obviously know this is something that is just now popping up, like the impact that has on our children. So in utero, I got passed down a lot of their toxicity. And because I'm the first child, which takes on a lot more of that toxic burden, I kind of was born into this world with like a lot of disadvantage to, my health in general. And so after I was about 15, 16, and I went to, I got scouted for modeling. And that's kind of when like about 6 to 8 years of like even deeper health issues, specifically gut issues, really started. So I was diagnosed with with like IBS. I was diagnosed with chronic constipation, SIBO. I was having all sorts of gut issues, food intolerances. And after a few years of kind of playing that like back and forth with different doctors and specialists, I just narrowed down my food to about 10 items of what I could eat and not have stomach aches. And that's what I kind of let myself live by. I was like, okay, if I just eat rice and chicken and maybe a few vegetables and some fruit, then I can get by and like not have insane stomach pains. And especially in the modeling industry, they're like, oh, you have to be on camera, you have to suck in your stomach and look good. So I couldn't eat things that would actually make me feel bloated at the time. And so that's kind of really what started me on this whole health journey. Ultimately, like I've had such a big love for food because my dad was a chef growing up, and I just really wanted to turn all the recipes and the things that he was making into foods that I could eat, and that some of my model friends that were also having some stomach issues that they could eat. So I was always busy with like making things healthy and figuring out like, what is my body like? What doesn't it like? And since I was very young, like I was put on the whole like supplement train. Well, now you need to take iron supplements because you're anemic and you have to take this. And so I was always really in that world of, oh, we can take certain things that make us feel better, but why doesn't it make us feel better long term? Like, why does it only have this like short effect, and then I'm back to like either having the same issues, if not more. So yeah, I feel like in that way I was lucky enough to, when I was like 16 to 18, like I was really sent on the path of holistic health and doing research. And because I was in the modeling industry and I had so much free time, I was just spending all my time on the internet, like reading through documents and looking at other people's health issues and figuring out like, oh, what is SIBO actually? Like, how does it get treated? And can I find a way to not do that without antibiotics, essentially? And long story short, I went through this whole up and down of like going into medical medium and doing cleanses and trying every sort of diet, trying every gut healing supplement, and always trying to find like the next best thing that was causing my issues. Like, oh, you know what? I think I'm gluten intolerant and now it's dairy. And so it was just the whole train that I feel like many of your listeners can probably relate to. It's like we've all been on that journey. Like if we have some sort of issue, then we'll like to blame it on something external. And yeah, like after that really didn't work, I just kind of gave up and was like, okay, I'm just going to stick to the foods that my body does well with. I know what to avoid. I know what to eat. And I thankfully got myself to a place where I was managing a lot of my symptoms. And then somehow detoxification came onto my path, specifically mucoid plaque cleanses, liver flushes. And I was excited because it was something I hadn't tried yet. And I kid you not, it was within about a week span of doing that cleanse that like everything transformed for me. I lost about 4 pounds worth of this mucoid plaque. So mind you, I was already doing a juice cleanse for about 2 days prior to this cleanse. I was teeny. I was like literally 10 pounds lighter than I am now. And I went through this 7-day cleanse and released like 4 pounds worth of, like old stool and old waste from my intestines, and like saw so much inflammation leaving my body. I saw parasites come out for the first time ever. And same with the liver flushes. I started to see the massive impact that it had on my mental clarity, on my skin. Again, like I flushed out so many parasites from my liver. And that's really what opened up my eyes to the world and the realm of detoxification and liver congestion, and understanding like, well, why do none of these like conventional approaches to healing our bodies actually work longer term? And that's really when I started realizing like the toxic burden that I had. And unfortunately, I don't know how much your listeners know about human design, but I'm a 3/6 manifesting generator. So I get to really mess up my entire life to then find out, okay, this doesn't work, this does work. So unfortunately, I detoxed myself and biohacked myself all the way into urgent care, had a near-death experience. And that really taught me, oh, it's not just physical, right? Like we can't just continue on this path of like just stripping the body from all these toxins and just going hard. And the more that we do that, the better that we feel. In fact, I was really exposed to the fact that if our bodies don't feel safe, they actually can't let go of anything. And through that journey of basically dealing with about a year long of like complex PTSD, actually longer than that, but like active PTSD and getting panic attacks and anxiety after that near-death experience is when I really found somatic work, emotional release, really working with IFS and parts work and the nervous system. And that's become such an integral part of my work now, and understanding, when I have a client and I can see 2 different people with the exact same expression of symptoms, their approach is going to look entirely different based on their traumas, based on their history, based on what they believe about supplements and food. And so that's really where my differentiation came in, I would say, from how a lot of people approach the world of detoxification and working with clients in a very masculine way of like, this is the protocol that works for everyone, versus, really individualizing and understanding like the energetics of someone, their nervous system, their history of like emotions that they've suppressed, and how they really perceive the world in terms of like, are they actually feeling safe or not? And so that's what I would say kind of brings me to today, where I integrate a lot of the physicality into my practice, and also a lot of nervous system regulation, meditation, a lot of energy work, and just really helping clients understand just how connected everything is.
Great. I think that's a pretty good encapsulation of one's life up until this point. So as a child, you were already dealing with some health issues. I mean, you mentioned things like you were diagnosed with SIBO or gut inflammation, eczema, things like that. like obviously one of I think the really interesting things that I'm sure we'll begin to talk about is, and you kind of alluded to this, that this power of belief, or sometimes it would be referred to like as our cosmovision, our worldview, how we see things. And like every cosmovision or worldview, whether it's as a group, a society, as an individual, like they're very different, and they have their powers and their weaknesses. Obviously, Western medicine can be good at doing a lot of things, and obviously it has its drawbacks, some quite, I think, severe drawbacks too. I would imagine as part of your journey, you said you felt quite fortunate as a child that your parents did expose you to alternative theories. Could you kind of break down, and only share as much as you want, but like from maybe that more Western model, which I'm sure at some point you came into contact with, and then maybe from some of these early childhood experiences too, like what was, I mean, you mentioned these diagnoses that you were given, but like what's the worldview of that? Like why are those things arising from that worldview? What are the manifestations of that? Like, how does that affect someone? Because I think specifically in your case, like those are things actually that a lot of people are dealing with right now. So
Right.
I think it's very useful in that sense, but also just in kind of putting things in a worldview, like why does something like that arise? Like from that worldview, what's causing it? Is it simply physical? Is there some chemical imbalance? Like, is there some genetic family history? Like, because I think that's where most people are, like from the start, kind of originating from. Like, okay, so where are these things? Where are they coming from? Why are they there?
Yeah, great question. So, I definitely was exposed to Western medicine, and it was very much that like classic, oh, you have skin issues, right? Like it was very much kind of swept under the rug, the way in which I kind of came with my whole laundry list of symptoms. And a lot of what we heard was like, oh, it's just dietary related. Like you're just simply not eating enough iron. You're simply not getting enough sunlight, right? Like for me, it was chronic vitamin D deficiency. I had iron deficient anemia. I had low ferritin levels, like crazy low. I was having all sorts of viral infections. Eczema was obviously one of them, like low serum zinc, and all of these things were kind of just like downplayed as dietary pieces. Like, oh, you must have not had enough of this in your diet. And so, I grew up actually compared to like looking at the standard American diet. Like I grew up in Europe, and like the diet was great, like, yeah, we ate sandwiches, but it was like from wheat that wasn't sprayed with glyphosate in the way that it is in the States. And we were eating lots of vegetables, and it was like a very good balanced diet, I would say. So I knew it wasn't dietary, but that was really what kind of they said it was, right? Like, oh, you're not absorbing your vitamin D, you're not absorbing your iron. And there's never really a reason for that. I know that kind of the way in which I look at this is like Western medicine tends to look at the outcome, right? And I don't want to generalize too much, but this was my experience with Western medicine. I'm sure there's amazing Western medicine doctors, but in my experience, it was very much like, okay, there's this symptom, here's the solution that we're taught from our book, right? Like, okay, eczema, here's the topical cream. Iron deficiency, here are the iron tablets or the iron liquid that you take. And then I feel like functional medicine and naturopathic medicine is kind of like the next step, which is they look at it and say, well, okay, if there's iron deficiency, like maybe let's look at your stomach acid and let's look at your gut lining integrity and kind of see what's happening there to see if we can support that to then support the absorption. And the way in which I would say I kind of look at it is like, okay, well, what are your minerals doing, right? Like what's the balance of specific mineral ratios to say, like, are you actually able to assimilate some of these nutrients? Are you like, is your thyroid working properly? Are your adrenals working properly? Like, are you in some crazy stress response? What is your nervous system experiencing? Because the way in which I kind of look at this is like, there's this domino effect that happens that if you experience stress in whatever capacity, right? And stress to you could mean something different than stress to me. Like I could be a child and experience unsafety in my environment, and that can be a chronic stressor to my nervous system. And when my nervous system experiences stress versus rest and digest, I don't produce enough stomach acid, I don't produce bile, I don't produce enough pancreatic enzymes. Like my entire body goes into defense mode or fight or flight mode, if you will, and therefore it kind of creates this whole cascade of symptoms, because if we don't properly digest our food, then now we don't properly assimilate our food, right? We don't absorb the nutrients. When there's undigested waste in the digestive tract because we don't digest our foods, then there's other microbes and parasites and candida needed in that environment to break down the food that our bodies can't break down because the body is too busy trying to fight off the bear or the tiger. And so it's kind of like this whole cascade of symptoms that I find people rarely trace back all the way to like, what's the biggest stressor in your life right now? And so whatever we can do to get your nervous system into a place of like being grounded, being regulated, and that usually happens like, yes, meditation and breathwork play a role in that, but I like to really look at like, okay, what deficiencies are present, what toxicity is present that's also really playing a role in stressing out your nervous system. So yeah, like I would say, the way in which like the worldview is of that, it's either Western worldview is like, okay, well, it's just happening because your body doesn't absorb it for whatever reason. So here's a solution, take a pill or take a liquid, without even knowing the consequences of that, right? Because iron pills and iron supplements in general are a great example because they actually feed pathogens. So you might be thinking, oh, the number of iron in my blood goes up, so it's a positive thing. But if we're not looking at the reason why you became anemic in the first place, if we're not looking at like the underlying foundational imbalances, then you're really just feeding those pathogens that you're also trying to eradicate. So it's kind of like very like one-sided view. Functional medicine, I would say, is a little bit better, but it still just looks at the root cause on a physical level. Typically, it's looking at that, oh, stomach acid isn't properly produced. We're seeing an issue with like enzymatic activity, the gut lining needs support, so we're just going to target that versus asking ourselves, well, why is the body not producing enough stomach acid? Why is the body not producing enough bile? And that's where I feel like my view on things is kind of like understanding the entire system, including things like generational trauma, including things like, oh, the patterns that the emotions that your mom was feeling when you were in the womb, like that all has an impact on your health today. And I think not enough people look at it in that way because it's not the shiny way of like, hey, here's the solution. You're going to feel fully better in 3 months. It's like, no, you actually have to do the work, and it might take a year for you to actually get to the place where you want to get to. And that's where I feel like we lose a lot of people because we're all promised these quick fixes. Like, you have SIBO, take antibiotics. It's going to fix you. Within a month, you're going to feel free of your symptoms. And I would just kind of argue that anytime that we're promised this like shiny object or this like red pill, we should really be asking ourselves, well, what are the consequences to this? Because the work, like when I say the work, it's like including like the discomfort of the ups and downs of the healing journey. Like that to me is true lasting healing. And some people get fortunate enough where like, they shift one thing and their entire health can shift, and that's what their experience is. But most people, and the people that I tend to see, they have done all those things and it didn't work. And now they're actually like, okay, I'm realizing that I need to actually step in and change my lifestyle, change my relationships, change the way I feel in my body in order for these symptoms to actually go away long term. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah. So you grew up in the Netherlands, and then you said at a somewhat young age you were scouted for modeling. Is that what brought you to the U.S.? And then what was that like for you? I mean, that industry, it's a very particular industry. I used to shoot some photography and kind of work in a similar industry, and I think it's an industry not a lot of people are familiar with. It's probably a lot of people idealize it for good reason, and probably some with maybe not a perfect understanding of it as well. But could you maybe speak a bit about that journey of moving to the States? I believe, if I'm correct, you moved to New York, and which would make sense. That's kind of the capital of modeling in the U.S. And we were speaking a little bit before we started, but from what I understand, that was kind of one of the beginnings or one of the foundations of this healing journey you've been on. And I think a lot of people I think in general, a lot of people don't correlate a place like New York as a healing journey. But,
totally.
It's a question I often get asked too. But for me, it was amazing because it's literally you have access to literally everything in the world. Maybe not literally everything,
Yeah,
but almost everything in the world. You have every school or every technique or every therapy. And so I think if you have that motivation, it's an amazing place because you have the world at your fingertips. And so I guess a bit about, that journey of modeling, that journey to the US and New York, and what you started to kind of discover or to change that furthered your path.
Yeah. So I will say that as a child growing up in general, and even in my modeling career, I never had the intention of going to the States. I feel like to Europeans and especially Dutch people, like the US is always like marketed as like these assholes and these people that are just so over the top. And it's just like marketed as like the system that's just not functioning well in whatever way. So I was like, I don't have any desire to go there. And I got scouted when I think it was 15 or 16, ended up traveling right after high school and just didn't know what I wanted to do in my career. So I was like, I'm just going to go travel and just see where that will take me. So I feel like I was always just like going from city to city. I would spend a month in Milan and then in Istanbul and then in Paris. And it was really hard to get into in the beginning because I was lucky enough to get in with like really good agencies, but there was always like something where I would get casted for these amazing jobs and then they always just fell through at the end. And so it was almost this feeling of like a very fated experience that I was like, I'm just not, like, I literally remember thinking, and I didn't even know like what I was talking about back then, but I would say like, the universe doesn't want me to have money. Like it was literally the belief that I was like wired to think like I'm getting all these opportunities and they never actually come through. And I now see that it was with very good reason because it's such a tempting industry, because I hear this from so many models. They want to get out so bad because it's so toxic, because of, the way that we're literally just like, sometimes you're literally in a line and it's like, yes, no. It's like, you're just being judged all the time just for your physical appearance. But like the promise of like the potential of the money in it is so good, because there's one, like you'll be working really hard on yourself and being like, am I going to get jobs? Am I going to make money? And then suddenly there's one job that confirms you and it's like 10K for one day, And so it's like these promises of like really unrealistic amounts of money for someone's appearance. And then suddenly like there's none of that. And you're kind of left with like, it's just like a constant game of like doubting yourself, doubting your appearance, feeling like you're not good enough. And so I was really in this spiral of like, okay, well, if my physical body is the only thing that clearly has value, right? Like I didn't have the education. I felt like I wasn't smart enough to do anything. So my physical body was the thing that was going to make me money. So I had to become in control of how I looked. And that looked like literally counting every single calorie I was consuming. I didn't go out into a restaurant for like 3 years straight because I needed to weigh everything that I was consuming to figure out exactly how many calories I was getting in. It was crazy. It was actually crazy. It was like a whole different version of self. And I was going to the gym like once or twice a day. And that were the only things that I could fully, like that was in my control, and anything else was out of my control. And so it was a very, very toxic few years, but obviously I was really grateful because it got me to the States. It got me to where I am now. I met amazing people. I saw the entire world. So in that sense, I'm very grateful for the journey, and there's definitely the pros and of course the cons to the industry. But yeah, as soon as I came to New York, I fell in love. I was like, wow, like there's this energy here that I've never felt. And coming from a country that's very much like in the box, right? Like everyone pays, I think you pay like 50% taxes if you make more than 100K a year. So like everyone is always kind of like trying to like just make under 100K so they don't fall into the 50% tax bracket, which is like such a weird mindset. And I remember just being in a place where like the sky is the limit, literally. People were making like millions and millions of dollars, and like it's like everyone just has these amazing hopes and dreams. And I feel like just so like I felt it was so inspiring for me to see people in that energy coming from a country where it's very much like you go to school, you get the job, you marry, and then like for the rest of your life you kind of stay in the same circles and the same environment. And it was in New York that I was exposed. I mean, again, like my parents were kind of spiritual, so like I knew about yoga and meditation, but I never actually like had gotten into it. And like you said, there is a massive scene in New York for wellness, and health. And I really just remember, like, my friends would go to yoga classes and sound healings. And this was very, very early, like when it was just kind of up and coming, and there were maybe like a few studios in Manhattan. And I remember going and just leaving like a completely different human. And I was like, what is this thing? Like, I want to go into this. Like, I'm so stressed all day, and then I'm coming here, and then like I didn't even know what a nervous system was at the time, but my entire nervous system just like relaxes, and I can feel connected to myself. And I was in New York when the pandemic happened, and that was for me like the massive turning point. I had just bought this book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I think that's what it's called, by Joe Dispenza. And it was the first ever like self development or spiritual book that I had ever bought. And I remember the pandemic started. I went back to the Netherlands and I read the book in like 2 days, and I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a whole reality out there that I haven't discovered yet. And I basically just went all in. Like the entire pandemic, I was meditating 2 hours a day. I was taking mushrooms. Like I was just like going into this whole realm that I'd never explored. And so, yeah, I would say like New York very much kind of exposed me to that world. And then when I kind of retrieved back in 2020, like that's really when I went into that whole world and industry, and kind of inspired what I do today.
So I think a lot of people listening, on the one hand, going to the gym once or twice a day, eating really well, like all of those things sound like really good, like that should be really good for you. Also, it was interesting in New York, like I was very much, I mentioned this briefly to you before we started, I was very much inspired. I mean, I would say one of my very early teachers in kind of my path in general, I mean, I had many, kind of depending on how you look at people, how you label them, but it was really interesting. I was living in the East Village, and or actually the Lower East Side, and but I'd go to the East Village, and there was this guy named Dr. David Jubbs. He had a little kind of food place on 10th Street, and it was like everyone was like super out there. I mean, I kind of coerced an actor friend of mine to go there, and we felt very out of place, but something about him and the place really resonated. And he was very much about this idea of life food, like the living energy of food, what today would maybe be considered raw food, although he didn't like that term, because like you could eat like I don't know, raw wheat, but that's not necessarily good for you.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of food that still has its life energy to it. And you know, these are also the bases of a lot of detoxification plans, food that contains all their enzymes, so your body can go into a state of healing and repair. And also, you know, very big, which I'm sure we'll begin to talk about, things like liver flushes and things like that. But the reason I bring that up is because I found something very, very healing about that. I mean, it literally shifted my cosmovision of how I began to look at food, not just of something that's calories or consumption, but actually as medicine. Also, as you said, these calculations of what am I putting into my body, and, you know, just like little things which have still stuck to me today. I mean, the guy was a visionary, very much so. I've actually had him on the podcast. I mean, my friend who I brought there, we would often joke, because you'd listen to a lecture of this guy, and you'd basically have no idea what he was talking about. But like 10 years down the line, like one little piece would stick with you, and then it turned out to be true. But, you know, like little things, like he would say, like, you should always, like, your olive oil, like oils are very important. And obviously they need to be in dark glass bottles because they can go rancid. They need to be organic because you don't want the pesticides, herbicides. It should be cold pressed. It should be extra virgin. It should be unfiltered. And all of those things sounded, you know, somewhat normal, even at that time, which was 2002. So, you know, a long time ago. But one of the things he said is it should be stone ground, and I remember thinking, like, I've never seen that on a bottle. How the hell am I going to find a stone olive oil? But it was very fascinating, and, you know, like I said, maybe 15 years down the line, I was reading this study, and they said there was all of these phytochemicals that were being discovered in olive oil that even wasn't like cold pressed per se, with kind of air quotation marks, because even through that processing of cold extraction, the machine still gets to a high enough temperature that these like phytochemicals that they were discovering get destroyed, and the only way you maintain that is through the traditional stone ground process. And they were describing these things as like these miracle cures and anti this, anti tumor, anti cancer, all of this. That's kind of a little tangent I went on, but my question with that is, because you mentioned these two things, like this one idea of obviously like there's a real benefit to nutrition, to diet, to exercise, and at the same time, I guess the reason I brought this up is because like I really believe in the work he was doing. Like I've seen, I mean, I saw myself go through huge detoxification processes. I mean, like, even though I was only like 22 at the time, like you start de-aging by years, and it's kind of strange at that age. But I had a buddy of mine who was a little bit older, and I mean, he literally looked 10, 20 years younger. I mean, it's crazy. But so obviously there's a real benefit. But one of the things I also saw from a lot of people, and I noticed it quite early, and I think for some people it took a while to maybe understand that. And it's one of the things you were also talking about, which is not everything is just physical. Like there's also mental, emotional components to this. But it's this idea that anything you do can become cultish, it can become dogmatic, and it can actually harm us in a way too. And what I saw, like from a lot of the people who were really strict kind of raw foodists, is it became, like you were saying, actually something very detrimental to them too, because they were like, as you said, like not necessarily counting calories, but like looking at everything, like was there any processing, was there any heat? You can only go to like one or two restaurants in the entire city, and that's in that city, which is already special compared to the rest of the world. Like, so you literally can't go to any restaurants. And so there becomes something very, very toxic about that in a way, which is interesting, because that's the very toxicity we're trying to cleanse ourselves from in a way. Can you speak a bit about that balance? This is another, I know, huge question, but the kind of that balance between obviously the very beneficial things that I think you began to discover, like these things that really are helping you, that are really working, and yet at the same time, the other side of that, like the cost of counting every calorie, of going to the gym potentially too much, of, even I would imagine that industry of modeling, like there's the benefit of like you do have to look after yourself, which is really good. And yet at the same time, the energetics of like literally that carnal aspect of, as you described, just being half naked or literally naked with many other women, and literally just constantly being judged, constantly being seen as just something physical. And then also that like constant, letdown, the constant disappointment. So kind of this more holistic, like all of these things have their two sides, and what that journey of you was like, kind of weighing those two costs. Yeah.
I mean, I think this is a thing that people struggle with a lot, right? As you say, no matter what industry they're in, because I saw this in the modeling industry, of course, and in my own journey, but I'm even seeing it in the industry that I'm in right now, which is like this whole like holistic, non-toxic, like there's a whole movement online where everyone's becoming aware of like all the toxins that are in our food and the glyphosate and the plastics. And it's like, it's almost gone a little bit too far into the other direction, where I think people, again, like it becomes this sense of needing to control, right? So I personally, like the way in which I do anything in my business right now, or like with my clients or in my own life, is like trying to find balance and understanding where my mind is creating more dis-ease and more toxicity, as you were saying so beautifully, than what my environment is actually causing. Because this would happen to me all the time when I was in my journey, and I think a lot of your listeners can relate. It's like we are always looking for the thing that is making us feel worse. Like we're always trying to upgrade and feel better, right? Like if we don't like something, we're like, okay, what can I do to feel better? And so it becomes this like pointing fingers to the external factor, because that's the very easy thing to point fingers towards. And so usually like it's just a journey of like trying to be in control of what comes in, not understanding that the very controlling aspect of it is the very thing that makes us more sick than the actual thing coming in, because our bodies are very capable. They're very smart. especially when our bodies are regulated, our immune systems are functioning properly, we are properly nourished, right? This is one thing that I think I would like to just tell your listeners. It's like, it's not about the heavy metals or the microplastics or the mold or whatever we're exposed to, because if we have adequate mineral reserves, like if our bodies are robust the way that they should be, the way that nature intended, we actually can handle a lot of toxicity. And actually, right, that's why we have a liver. That's why our livers literally can generate within 6 weeks new cells, because we can handle toxicity. We can handle stress. It's just, however, like, it's just like what we believe about our bodies. And I think like there's this whole idea that we're so fragile, and now microplastics are found in the human brain and it's having all these detrimental effects. And yes, I think it's absolutely true. But like, as a species, we wouldn't be here today if we didn't have really resilient bodies. And I think it's just about finding that balance of learning how to protect yourself against toxicity, and at the same time also learning to be in the world. Because I see people, and I've been on this journey myself, where like there were years where I would avoid every restaurant because what if the seed oils, and, you know, like would not drink, like I would be on a plane and like be thirsty, but I didn't want to drink the plastic water bottle because the plastic water bottle and there's heavy metals in the water. And like all of that mental space that takes up is so extremely toxic to the body. And I'm like the ambassador of psychosomatically creating my own symptoms. And I can tell, you know, it's like, I mean, there were times where I was having panic attacks and I would literally create my own heart attack mimicking symptoms. And someone actually told me at a certain point that like, I don't even know what percentage, a really high percentage of people coming into the urgent care thinking they're having a heart attack are actually having a panic attack, because the mind is such a powerful place where it can think, oh my gosh, there's something wrong, right? And so I think if we understand the power of the mind, we can also use that to our benefit and understand that when we are going out, when we are taking a few days off the gym, when we are on vacation, is that we can actually use that awareness, use that intention, like even bless our foods in that way of like, hey, my body is so capable. I'm only going to absorb whatever I need from this food and leave the rest. And I think just using our awareness in that way can really help offset the way in which our bodies respond to things. Because I'll kind of keep this short because it's a whole thing that we can go into, but there's something that I talk in my work about that's based on, I did this whole like limbic system retraining program once, and it was called Primal Trust. Highly recommend people check that out. But she really talks about the cell danger response, which is a theory that kind of goes into what happens when the body perceives a threat. And this can be a physical, psychological, emotional threat, whatever it is. And the danger of when that response kind of gets stuck, right? Like this is where we see autoimmune, chronic inflammation, things like that. And one really beautiful thing that she said that stuck with me for so long, and this is something that I have observed in myself and in my clients, and it was the moment that all clicked for me, is that if you have to believe that there's something wrong with your body, then that response gets turned on, like it stays on all the time because it's not safe. There's something wrong 24/7 because you believe that your body is broken and your body can't handle the things and whatever. So then, of course, from that state of being, you're going to develop, you know, sensitivities to chemicals, to mold, to your environment, to your relationships, to foods, right? Like all these intolerances are starting to develop because you have to believe that there's something wrong with you or with your body. And I have seen people have tremendous, like almost like miraculous responses to things that they were really sensitive to or were having bad experiences with when they actually were able to shift that internal response. And so what I typically just tell my clients is like anything that it feels like you're doing a chore or a task, like actively trying to like avoid all toxins and change your entire like, you know, inner reality and outer reality and going through all the products in your home. If that becomes stressful, then you're doing it wrong because now you're putting stress on the body, which is actually doing more harm than the product itself. So I think it's about really finding the balance of understanding that we're not supposed to be perfect, but we're doing things with intention and with awareness. And then we get to just trust that our bodies are fully capable of handling things. And like, you know, one thing that in which I really love to protect myself, which I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit today, is mineral balancing. Like it's something that I found about 1.5 years ago. And when I really realized that the reason why I was absorbing so much of my toxins and why my body was struggling so much was because of the chronic depletion over the years of like being on diets and being really restrictive and having a nervous system that wasn't absorbing things and doing a lot of detoxification that was very like draining to my system and very depleting on like a mineral level. And so now that I've worked up like really great mineral reserves, like I can handle the foods. I can handle like, even if I wanted to have, you know, I don't drink, but if I wanted to have a drink or if I wanted to do something that I know is going to stress out my system, I have the reserves to deal with like the backlash of that. So yeah, I think it's just about like getting our bodies to a point where they are resilient and we can handle all sorts of stress in life, which is, in my experience, like the whole point of life.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that idea of the power of the mind. I think that's such a fundamental aspect. But kind of circling back a little, so you're in New York. What are some of the things that you begin to find that you really feel are resonating? Like you've tried all these different things, obviously in Holland, part of your journey, different systems, different cosmovisions. What are the things that start to click? Like I think a lot of people have experienced that. Maybe not everyone, but I think at some point in people's journey. Because it's also a natural part of life. Like much like kids, we have to try things. We have to fall down so we can stand up and learn how to do things better. What were the things that you started to do that physically, like you felt something change? That energetically you felt something change? Like there was a click inside. Like okay, yeah, now I'm onto something. This is working. This is part of like my path of probably not even just helping me, but I could see how this can also help other people.
Yeah, I will say that for me, a lot of it was mental, emotional. Like after getting bullied for so many years and also being on birth control and having like all sorts of ways in which my emotions were really suppressed, I actually prided myself on not crying for 6 years. Like I would just shut off all of my emotions and all my feelings. And for me, I think the biggest impact on my journey was realizing like how much of like an armor I was wearing and how I was living in this constant state of fear, but I wasn't feeling the fear. So like I was actually just kind of keeping a distance from the fear, like not wanting to look at the things that weren't in alignment in my life, such as like I remember to this day, and I always am like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Mom. But she would help me with my finances at the time. And she would always send me messages like, hey, I need so-and-so from you because we need to file your taxes in Holland and whatever. And I would just ignore her for 4 weeks. I would just pretend I wouldn't get her messages because I didn't want to look at my finances because it was really painful for me to look at that. And I couldn't take ownership for like the actual financial stress that I was in. So I just put it on her and had her deal with my financial stress. And so I started to really awaken to these parts of myself where I actually literally couldn't face what I was going through because it was uncomfortable or painful, and I had like shielded myself off from those emotions. And it wasn't until the pandemic that things really hit because like my entire life stopped, all of my work got stopped, and I was like, oh gosh, now I really have to look at these things. But even before that, I entered a relationship at the time, and bless his heart, you know, he loved smoking weed, and I'm Dutch, so like it's very much in my nature, but I'd never really got into it too much. But in a way, it kind of allowed me at the time to really deeply connect to my emotions. And like right now, I don't really use any substances anymore, but at the time it like allowed my heart to open and for me to like drop in so deeply into my body and being like, wow, I can feel things and I can feel my nerves and I have like feelings in my body and emotions. And it actually allowed me to get into a state where I could like share from my heart and cry and like start to do the inner work in that space by using these plant allies like weed and psilocybin at the time, and like kind of experimenting in those realms. And of course I was using it more so recreationally, but because I was with the people that I really trusted, these like almost like ceremonial spaces started to open up, and I started to see the need for more intention in my use of these plant allies. And that for me really started opening up this whole like basically Pandora's box of like, oh wow, like I haven't felt these things my entire life. Like I've just like squashed them down and thought that I would get over them, and I can like talk about my sexual trauma, but like be completely disembodied when I talk about it and just be like, yeah, that happened and whatever. But like actually never have been able to feel them and to actually process them in my body. Right. And so I would say like it was unknowingly kind of the start to part of what I do now, right? Somatics, like being aware of like what feelings arise in the body, being able to communicate to them. And I will say that plant medicine was really my opening to that. And same with like yoga and meditation and just like the world of going inward and being with my breath and being present. And especially, and I know that you know this about New York, like New York is such a fast city and people can just like go, go, go. And I was literally drinking 4 cups of coffee a day, just like on this like adrenaline surge, like living on cortisol. And to enter those like very intentional spaces where I could actually pull back the layers and not rush through the class and not like rush through the experience. That's really when I started to be like, oh, like I see how much of an impact this has on my body. I see that I'm in less physical pain. I have less muscle tension. I feel just more like calm and at ease in my mind. I can actually be with and process things that are happening during the day. And so that's what I would say like really opened up my perception to like those levels of self that I wasn't really able to access. And I do want to really add there that like on the plant medicine piece, and I'm not sure obviously how much of that work you bring into your audience, but I always like to just really like play devil's advocate with it as well, because I think it can be something so beautiful if done in the right set and setting. But I also think that it's kind of where a lot of people get really lost, because in my experience, the deepest work that we can do is to do the work sober. And that's really like what I've kind of devoted my journey to for the last few years. It's like, can I actually get into those states and work on my patterns and like work on like my attachment wounds and all of these things without the use of these plants, so that when I do enter those spaces, I'm actually coming in from like a clean slate and not bringing all of my trauma into the space. So I usually do say like, even though it came on my path pretty recreationally and like I got really blessed in that sense of like who I was spending time with and what I was exposed to, when I work with my clients now that are newer to that world, I don't ever recommend them starting in the same way. So I always like to add that as well.
So one of the things that I saw you focused a lot on, and it was also one of the things I mentioned with Dr. Jobs, was this idea of detoxification, and specifically through liver flushing. Probably some people are familiar with that, but it's becoming kind of more in the common vernacular. But certainly, it's still not a very common practice. Can you speak about that idea? I mean, why the liver? Like of all the organs, like why focus on the liver? What is the functionality of the liver? And what is that process like of flushing out the liver? Like, what does that look like? How is that done? And why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, so liver flush is actually our very ancient modality. There was a story that someone once told me, and I'm going to tell it, but I don't know how true it is, but it does make sense. So I'm just going to say like, don't quote me on this, but what this person told me was that, way, way, way back in the day, like we have to imagine that we actually went for very long periods of time without a lot of food, right? Like we were like hunter-gatherers, like maybe we were like picking berries and eating these things, and then they would kill an animal and come back with this like massive feast of meat and like fatty organs and things like that. So if you look at like the way in which our ancestors used to eat, it was very much like restricting ourselves from fat and then eating a massive amount of fat, which in theory naturally should flush the liver, because anytime that we abstain from fats for a period of time, the bile will build up. And then when we eat a large amount of fat, which is ultimately what you do with a liver flush, the gallbladder actually has this like really powerful purging effect. And so that, from my understanding, would logically make sense to me as to why in the day and age that we are today, we actually don't flush our livers, because we always eat a little bit of fat with our meals, or we avoid fats if we're thinking like, oh, fat is bad for us. But like rarely do we ever like feast on like a whole like animal and like eat all of the organs and the fatty parts, right? So it does make sense in that sense. But So like the reason why I think liver flushing or working with the liver in general is so important is the liver has like 500 vital functions in the body. It's extremely important. And especially when it comes to detoxification, because it filters all of the blood, right? So it's going to filter out the toxins from the blood. And in that process as well, what it also does is it specifically detoxes like fat soluble toxins through bile, which is a digestive fluid, which helps in the fat digestion as well. So it's very, very important in our detoxification process. It also helps process hormones, mycotoxins, like plastics, all of these things. So whenever it's congested, which we'll get to in a moment as to why it gets congested, a lot of these toxins and hormones can actually back up. And what we see a lot today, right, this is more common than ever, is like estrogen dominance and things like that, or like people that are really toxic. And the reason why this happens is because our bile, when it doesn't have the correct consistency, which can happen through like so many different reasons, right? Like we talked about the nervous system playing a huge role in bile acid production. We also talked about mineral deficiencies or other nutrient deficiencies. If your thyroid is underactive and there's not a proper conversion of thyroid hormone, then it also directly influences the bile. So there's all these things that influence the really like the consistency of the bile acids. And what happens is that it will kind of get thick and congealed, and it can eventually turn into stones, which people think are really hard. Like once they're fully calcified, they've been in there for a very long time. But even like just congealed bile just gets like these thick, like almost like, I mean, what is it even, like a little like gooey, like clay, almost clay consistency, where like, yeah, it's like kind of malleable, but it's still like thick and it doesn't move freely. And whenever this happens, right, like bile is the way in which we release a lot of our toxins. So it's very toxic for the liver to have that build up and to have that kind of clog a lot of those bile ducts. And the way in which I kind of like people to imagine those bile ducts is like a massive network of roots from a tree. So like, I think there's like hundreds of these tiny little bile ducts, but a lot of them can get congested with these stones or even parasites. Parasites actually in the liver can play a role, because when there is a lot of that congestion, parasites do absorb heavy metals a lot better than humans can. And so they actually tend to kind of feed on our bile and feed on those heavy metals. So when I first started liver flushing, I actually flushed out hundreds of liver flukes, and they were full on metallic. So they were literally holding on their body weight in heavy metals. So in a way that really helped me, because now those heavy metals are not circulating in my body or in my tissues. But of course, right, in an ideal world, we don't have the heavy metals and we don't have the parasites. So the reason why liver flushing is so important is because if we don't actually work on like thinning our bile and flushing the liver, and I think most importantly, even deal with the reason why the bile became thick, because this is another thing that I feel like a lot of people are kind of stuck in. And by no means am I saying that I have all the answers, but if people do 200, 300 liver flushes and still flush out stones, I begin to raise a question: why does the liver still create this congestion, right? Like there has to be a reason that your bile is not thin enough to actually flow freely if you flushed out like literally buckets full of liver stones and things like that. So I'm by no means like a full like do liver flushes every single month for the rest of your life like some people are, because I do think that there is consequences that we just don't know yet. Like someone that I deeply trust was talking about liver necrosis, right? Like it could actually really dehydrate the liver and damage the liver if we do things that are really stressful for periods of time. So I think it's about really finding a balance. And in my experience, the balance comes from really working on that thinning of the bile, working with the foundation. So working with mineral balancing, working with things that thin the bile. And then over time as well, performing like, I usually say like 5 to 10 liver flushes over the course of a year can like really advance someone's journey. And the way in which a liver flush is performed is you basically take things that open the bile ducts, thin the bile for a few days. So you're kind of like preparing the body and the liver, which is really important. Like you can never just drink a massive glass of olive oil it will send you to the hospital because, again, like it can move those, like the sludge and the stones along without actually properly expelling them. So you have to do things that widen those bile ducts, that like really bring heat to the liver, right? Like that soften the stones, things like that. And then ultimately at the end of the day, you're just drinking citrus, so either lemon or grapefruit juice with a large amount of olive oil, and that will trigger this really strong bile release and will kind of flush the liver. And for some people, this can literally flush out stones the size of golf balls. For some people, it looks like this like sandy, thick paste, which is ultimately that congealed bile, that congestion. And it can literally range from like bright green, which is the color of bile, all the way to like sandy, like dark brown when it's been in there for a very long time. And yeah, I've seen so many people flush out like many parasites as well. So it's a very, very common process. It does gain popularity more and more. And I think it's for good reason, because when I was actively flushing once a month for like a few months, I felt literally like the best mental clarity I've ever felt. Like didn't need any caffeine. I would wake up with insane energy. I would be so incredibly grateful and happy. And my vision was literally as if I was on plant medicine 24/7. So like, it's really amazing to feel what the body does in its natural state when there's no congestion present. And I also want to just say that like, it's really normal to kind of go through phases where there is a little bit more congestion present because, right, we're exposed to, like, it depends on like how our nervous systems are. Like, do we experience stress in work? Do we eat properly? Like maybe we're exposed, like we're living in molds, like all of those things kind of like back up the system and make that bile thicker. So we do have to consistently work with the liver, in my experience, and ultimately get our bodies to a place where it has like the capacity and the minerals and all the cofactors to create good, like flowing bile. And at the same time, with the modern day that we live in and like the toxicity that we're exposed to, it is also common to kind of need to repeat that process. So, yeah, like, you know, one also thing that I'll add to this, because I know a lot of people these days, as we talked about in the beginning, really struggle with SIBO or constipation or like in general, candida overgrowth, mold toxicity. And whenever that's present, I can guarantee you that the liver is involved because, and this is a really interesting thing to look at as well, the liver should be neutralizing the acidity of the stomach. So in like a perfect functioning human, right, we have really acidic stomach acid, which is kind of like our first line of defense against parasites, microbes, things like that. When it's not acidic enough, then the parasite eggs usually survive, the microbes survive, right? So the liver should be neutralizing through bile, because bile is extremely, It's alkaline. So bile is extremely alkaline, and so it should be neutralizing that acidity. But if there's not enough bile to neutralize the acidity, it will signal to the body to create less stomach acid, basically to protect the internal organs. So what happens now is that the entire pH of the digestive tract turns like it's a little off essentially, and that will really have a massive effect on your microbiome. So now the way that in which like I like to look at it is like bile is kind of your microbial agent. It's kind of keeping specific microbes in check and keeping overgrowths in check. And when there's not enough bile present, a lot of those bacteria just kind of have like the playground, and they can just roam freely and just take up more space. So when you flush the liver, it is really, really potent in shifting that microbiome as well, because now you're just flushing out a massive amount of this like super alkaline fluid into the digestive tract, and it's really washing a lot of that digestive system. So I've actually seen people expel full cultures of candida during their liver flushes, because the body goes through such a massive like alkaline purge, if you will, and it really tends to kind of like crowd out parasites, candida, molds through that process. So for people with SIBO, I definitely will spend like a solid time on like decongesting the liver, working with liver flushes, focusing on like the thinning and building of new bile. And that tends to have a really massive effect in their bloating, in their motility, and any sort of gut issues that they experience.
And do you find certain protocols more beneficial? I mean, they all tend to be somewhat similar, but you have some that are more strict, like completely raw food or
right,
vegan for a week and then doing a flush. You have some that may be just vegetarian, but you can still have certain foods. There's some where you potentially also supplement with certain herbs that help to get the bile flowing, your digestive system kind of cleansing itself. Drinking apple cider vinegar or apple juice to also, as you said, allow the bile to flow. Do you find certain things to be more beneficial than other ways with your experience of doing this work?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my experience going into it was very much like the raw vegan approach or like even like juices on liquid before. I have found that to be way less efficient than the method actually that I use now, where I actually have my clients eat more the days prior, just because we have to think about like, we're not just flushing out bile, we're also flushing out a lot of minerals, right? Like we're really losing a lot of life force when we're actually going through such an intense process. And so to really prep the body with like a solid amount of like mineral rich foods, including animal protein, like I've really seen people have amazing flushes when they feel a lot more robust coming into this cleanse. So yeah, we definitely do work with things that soften the stones. So like, as you said, apple juice is a great example, apple cider vinegar. I love tart cherry juice, or just working with malic acid in general, just pure malic acid. And then there's certain herbs that I will have my clients take as well the weeks leading up. Like I kind of am someone that I give my clients the option to just like use all of the tricks in the playbook, and like, it doesn't mean they have to choose them, but I have seen like if you work with the herbs and with the softeners, and you're working with like these specific enzymes and things like that, that people do get more successful flushes. And then I personally like to work with the kits from Zen Cleanse. I know they're a little more expensive than the original Andreas Moritz process. I just find it to be really gentle on people that are really sensitive, just because the enzymes rather than Epsom salts are what are softening and opening the bile ducts and softening the stones, rather than taking Epsom salts, which can just be a little bit more intense in terms of like shifting people's electrolyte balance. So yeah, I personally have seen people have great results with those cleanses. And again, like if they have done one of those and they feel really good, then we usually implement those other methods that are a bit more harsh on the bodies. But I do tend to get just like the clients that are a bit more sensitive. So I like to kind of take them through that journey a little bit slower. And then another thing that I really like to introduce that some people don't is binders, right? Like you are dealing with like years of toxicity that you're flushing out. So just to kind of support the body in the days afterwards with really like remineralizing the body, binding to the toxicity. And so, yeah, it becomes this like very thought out process. And I've had clients like early on in my journey when I didn't really know all of those methods yet, that just did it like the good old way, like the very basic way. You still get the results, but for the sake of like really protecting the system long term, to really prep yourself into it and also like support your system out of it, remineralize it, I think is just really important, because we're really straining, or like we're really taxing the adrenals and the nervous system in that process as well.
And do you also like using things like coffee enemas, colonics? Do you find those beneficial as part of kind of the final stages of those processes?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the thing is like the liver is very high. It's like above the small intestine, right? So we have to think that like all of that toxicity gets to travel all the way down and then needs to eventually come out the toilet. So like the faster that we can support that process of it coming out, whether it's with a colonic, I tell people like if your system handles colonics well, like doing a colonic the next day is really helpful, because it's going to really like wash out everything. But most people, including myself, are fine with just doing coffee enemas the next days. I've done some days where I would literally do 2 coffee enemas in one day after a liver flush. Like this is when I was like hardcore. I would do like 6 tablespoons of coffee. I would never do that again. Like right now I'm more like a 1 tablespoon coffee enema kind of person. But yeah, I would have these really, really powerful like coffee enemas after, where I would release like so much, and I would literally like feel it coming from my liver. I would be in meditation and like imagine it coming out. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that it's a very spiritual process to go through a cleanse or a purification process, right? And if we can actually work with the energetics and with the physical at the same time, you're going to get much more of a powerful release. Like I've had so many clients that were very much detached from their like emotional, mental, energetic body that would do the cleanse and be like, I saw nothing come out. I'm like, yeah, because you're holding on to all these emotions and energies like at the same time. But the people who are actually like treating it like a ceremony, like you pray with the whatever products that you're going to be sitting with and taking in, and then you're going through this whole like deep letting go process, and you're setting intentions, and to actually go through the coffee enemas and the releases with going in and connecting to the liver, like feeling the energy of like whatever the toxicity or the parasite is leaving the body, like you can actually fully feel it coming out. And I've seen people had way better experiences actually implementing those things. So, but yeah, long story short, I'm a huge fan of colonics and coffee enemas in that process in general. Like I usually have my clients that are on active detox protocols, especially when we're working with metals and mycotoxins and parasites, like at least doing a coffee enema once a week if they can. It's really, really beneficial.
And one of the really interesting things you spoke about is this idea of parasites, and I think for a lot of people that's quite a foreign concept. I mean, often when we think of parasites, we think of like foreign countries, places that maybe don't have the same sanitation that we're accustomed to. And yet also at the same time, I think more people are also realizing that, I forget the exact statistic, but I think it's been said that we have more foreign organisms in our body than we do human organisms. So, there's an entire ecosystem that's alive within us. Mm-hmm. And those can also be seen as parasitical. I think often like what we refer to when we refer to something as parasitical, because everything is alive, would be some sort of dysbiosis rather than a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. Also, as you were saying, like a lot of people do realize, I mean, you even have theories that things like cancer, their base can be parasites, whether it's 100% or it can be a cofactor. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like we do know that parasites do cause harm. I mean, if anyone's been to the jungle, and there's a whole host of parasitical infections. I mean, mm-hmm. Malaria, for example, kills hundreds of thousands of people worldwide every single year. Right. And also predominantly children and old people, as you were saying, people whose immune systems are not quite as robust. So mm-hmm. It's a very real thing. I think more people are beginning to understand that there can be these ideas of dysbioses, that parasites can have an effect. I mean, even on the extreme, like these cordyceps, parasites, which can literally take over the mind of a creature and literally, get it to do whatever it wants. At the same time, kind of as we were talking about this idea of kind of wisdom, looking at things from both sides, there also can be, much like you were saying, like taking antibiotics for something just to eradicate mm-hmm. everything. Mm-hmm. And this kind of idea that we often have in maybe more of our Western medical sense of just eradicating whatever's there. Mm-hmm. And obviously that can have very deleterious effects too, because it is a very delicate system, or it can be. So what is kind of your understanding of parasites? Like where are they coming from? What's important to think about, and how to begin to work on that if that's in someone's kind of worldview, and even if it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's really important for people to understand that we all have parasites. They're not this like foreign thing that you can only attract when you're in Asia or other countries. There's different parasites there, right? There's also different like foodborne illnesses there in general. And, we're just exposed to like all these different bacteria that are on the other side of the world that we usually are not getting exposed to. So very real thing, but we all have them. And the way that I look at that is like, they're part of like a natural ecosystem. So the same way that you go to a forest and there's like all these microbes in the soil and different earthworms and things like that. It's not that the earthworm in the soil in the forest is bad. It's just that they are playing a role in that current ecosystem. And I will say that I have a very different view from like most naturopathic functional doctors on this, because I actually think that from a terrain-based perspective, the parasites are playing a role in your ecosystem if they are currently there, right? It's kind of like what I explained around if we have a lot of undigested food in our system, the body actually allows certain microbes to overgrow to help offset that waste in the system, because otherwise it's rotting food in the system, which likely will do more damage than actually the bacteria that actually end up fermenting or eating that food. So the way in which I like to look at parasites is that our bodies are a perfect vessel or a perfect environment for whatever organisms are living within us. So it is our responsibility and our ability to actually clean or change that inner environment to make them leave if we want to, right? If we have a desire to release the parasite, we have to look at what created the environment for it in the first place. And usually we will see things like low oxygen environments, excess waste. Toxicity is a massive one, as I told you about the about the heavy metals. In general, like understanding, right, where is our body not getting enough oxygen, in the sense of like, where's our lymph flow impaired? Where do we have a lot of physical tension? So I really like to look at like the entire organism and the entire system as like how it's responding. And then of course as well, like where do we have stress in our life that is causing that low stomach acid that is actually allowing parasites to come in through like, or other organisms through foodborne sources. And another thing that people I don't think really look at is the more mental emotional part, because your body is such a reflection of your inner reality, right? Like of your psyche. So if you don't know how to set boundaries, for example, what do you think that's going to translate into your energetic system, into your physical system? If the body doesn't know yes and no, it's going to not know yes and no with certain organisms as well. And so I've literally seen clients go through a process where we would go into a somatic journey, start to set boundaries with people in their lives that they never have set boundaries before, and the next day release 10, 20 parasites in the toilet. And so we really start to see this connection between parasites, that just as much as we are just energetic beings, even though we can see the physical manifestation of us, we have the same thing with parasites. So parasites very much have these energies, these parasitic energies or entities that are connected to their physical body, if you will. And when we actually work on releasing those toxic energies from our body and from our field, they can leave as well. And so same reason why, you know, I'm saying I'm very cautious with things like plant medicine, because we open up doors to other realms in those spaces where we can very much have those parasitic energies attached to us. And this is why we often see, right, people that go to the Amazon, they go sit with ayahuasca, whatever it is, and then come back and have like a lot of stomach issues after. And I've had clients where we actually had to go in and remove those entities, and then they had a massive purge of whatever the physical manifestation of that was. So I think if people can start to understand that whatever they are currently experiencing, whether it's candida, whether it's mold, whether it's SIBO, whether it's parasites, or a combination of all of them, which is likely what we all have. Like if you're going to do a stool test, everyone has some candida. It's a natural form of our natural occurring in our microbiome. Same with strep and staph. All of these bacteria are natural parts of our microbiome. Same with E. coli. But it is them getting overgrown because they have the opportunity to. These are opportunistic organisms that we need to start to ask questions as to why our bodies have allowed them to overgrown, and then work on those things. And that can be mineral reserves, it can be bile flow, it can be, right, the immune system. So if we do a great job at just optimizing as an entire being, we will see those shifts happen in the microbiome and in all of the organisms living within us as well. And I will say that since being on this mineral balancing protocol and really working on like giving my body the energy that it actually needs, I have eliminated more parasites, more biofilm, more candida than I have on any anti-something protocols, any kill protocols that I've ever done, and with so much less like aggressiveness in it as well.
So you mentioned this idea of the terrain, and can you speak a bit about that? I mean, for people who are unfamiliar, usually the kind of worldview or cosmovision that in the West we look at is called germ theory, and it's this idea that like a germ comes into us, and therefore it's going to have X, Y, and Z effect. Terrain theory being more that the terrain, the environment, is more important, and you know, for a long time germ theory was much more prevalent, and my sense is terrain theory is becoming potentially more and more accepted. I mean, even being in the Amazon was very fascinating because, like I just mentioned, malaria. It's a very fascinating thing. I mean, you could have a group of people and someone would get it, someone wouldn't, and like, what's the difference? I mean, over 5 years, 10 years, whatever, like, you're probably going to get bit by the same mosquito that everyone else is getting bit by. So why was it affecting certain people and not other people? And I think something like the terrain theory describes that much better. So can you speak a bit about that? Because I think that theory is, like, obviously maybe it makes sense to people, but I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first encountered it, it was probably a couple years ago, and it really helped me understand so much more about, in my experience, like the very limited way in which we look at disease in Western medicine or in like the current worldview. And so, as you said, right, like Western medicine or germ theory really looks at this idea of like, okay, we get exposed to a virus, which is 100% guaranteed that that virus or bacteria or parasite will cause this certain disease, which we actually have no data for. Like, there's no data that like A plus B is C, right? Like, there's actually no proof of that, but we treat it in that way because part of what I believe is like, it's profitable, right? Like, we can give everyone the same vaccine and we can give everyone the same antibiotics. And it's basically really easy to just say like, okay, this is what the textbook says, because otherwise, right, it's really about empowering the individual and changing their lifestyle and changing their relationships. And like, no one wants to do that. So it's not a profitable market. So then we have terrain theory, which really says that, I like the fish tank idea. So if there's a fish that's in like a really filthy fish tank and the fish gets sick, germ theory would say, okay, we're going to vaccinate the fish, right? Terrain theory would say we would actually clean the fish tank and we would change the water and put minerals in the water and then see if the fish would get better, right? So it really looks at like, what is your internal and external terrain that, right, like, or ecosystem is what I like to call it as well, that is causing you to experience these symptoms. And what we really often find is that, like, I mean, it's such a, there's people that I really love. Alex Zek is one of them. There's an Instagram account called Beyond Terrain that's great, or Undercover Virologist. All of these Instagram accounts have really amazing data. If I had more time on my hands, I would probably be all up in those books. I've read a few of them and they are really, really amazing. But I wouldn't say I feel confident in terms of like holding a debate with someone to speak on like how all viruses are non-existent and like how vaccines are, like a complete BS. And so I'm not going to take on that role in this podcast, but I know that they do, and they do a phenomenal job of actually like really laying out, all of the research that's kind of been swept under the rug and like everything that's out there when it comes to understanding just in general, like disease and how it manifests in the body. And what I love about the way that they look at terrain theory is that they're not just looking at like, okay, what's present in your physical body, right? The toxicity, like the enzymes, the nervous system, but they're also really looking at more of like the emotional state as well. So like, what traumas that you experience as a child that are informing the physical body to now experience this disease now that you're exposed to molds or something like that. And one thing that I also find fascinating is that the way in which our bodies kind of map like circumstances, and this is such an interesting way of looking at it, is that if you have a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Whatever is present in the body at the time of that traumatic event of this argument, the body is going to take a snapshot from, and it's going to say, this is not safe. So if you were eating a pizza at the time that you're having this like massive argument or this massive traumatic event, the next time you're going to eat pizza, your body is actually going to correlate whatever is in that pizza, whether it's the gluten or the cheese, to this traumatic event and likely have some sort of response to that. So it is about actually kind of changing the limbic system and changing the way that our bodies are perceiving certain foods, certain bacteria, and certain things, and its response to that to actually start to create that like neuroplasticity for the body to get back to a space of health. And why it's like actually a big part of like why I do what I do and why I love working with mineral balancing, because ultimately what mineral balancing really does is it's forcing your body to revisit these old mineral patterns that were associated with times in your life where maybe you were exposed to certain bacteria and viruses, or you were having a massive like physical injury or an emotional injury that your body wasn't able to fully process and fully heal. And so it kind of like stacks these, what is it? Kind of like the way that the brain works is it kind of prioritizes specific things, right? Like if you were to process all of your traumas, all of your physical injuries all at once, like we wouldn't be able to function. So the body, if it's going through a trauma, whether it's physical or emotional, it's like, oh, I don't have time for that right now, so I'm going to put it here for later. And what mineral balancing does, or in general, just working with like actual holistic health does, is it actually gives you enough energy so that you can go and revisit and retrace that original physical, emotional, energetic experience to actually deal with it for good. So what I've seen with people who go on this journey, and what we call retracing is basically going back to those experiences and actually clear them, is that very much whatever thing it was, like whether it was malaria or dengue fever or like whatever it was that the system couldn't process at the time, they will have symptoms coming back from whatever they were going through and then fully cleared from their body. So it's not uncommon to go on the journey, detoxification in general, but also to work with like mineral balancing and to re-experience a lot of like our childhood illness or a lot of our physical injuries as a child or our emotional trauma. And that to me is kind of like such a perfect example of what terrain theory really stands for. It's this idea that like until we change that inner environment, until we actually like, right, in the way that Bessel van der Kolk says, like the body keeps a score, like we have to go back and like fully feel through and process and like heal that trauma, whether it was physical or emotional, and then the body actually can go on to the next thing. And it just, to me, doesn't, or like wouldn't make sense that, okay, you know, I get exposed to molds, my partner gets exposed to molds, why am I experiencing these symptoms and why is he not, right? Like there's clearly something within us and the way that our bodies respond to this very same level of exposure, if we're both living in that environment, that makes my body go, this is not safe, I need to have this massive response, and his body go, oh, I feel fine, right? There's like some sort of deeper intelligence going on, some sort of like deeper toxic bucket is what I like to say. Like if my bucket's already overflowing with like trauma and toxicity and heavy metals, then like the mold coming in is the very thing that overflows the bucket. Whereas for him, maybe his system is more resilient and robust, and like the mold actually doesn't create this whole cascade of symptoms. So I think it's going to dominate. I mean, I'm seeing it, right? Like it's really changing, like the whole holistic industry, the whole health industry in general, like they're tired of this like very single focused approach because it's clearly not working. And with how sick we are these days and how more and more kids are being born into this world with so many illnesses and like autism and things like that, I personally think that there's this massive awakening journey happening to like this more terrain theory based approach.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, in the US, and I would imagine around the world, it's the same trajectory that this is the first generation now that has a lower life expectancy than their parents. And I mean, that's
right.
That's something wild to really think about. And I think it is causing people to really shift their worldviews on everything, like, you know, whatever your views are on Western medicine, or as you said, vaccines, all of these things. I mean, all of these things are very complex. It's never black and white, but we often take things to be very black and white, that these things are inherently good somehow, without even really having any understanding of a deeper sense of the functionality of these things. Can you speak about mineral balancing or rebalancing? You mentioned it a few times, and you've spoken a little bit about it, but I think that's something that not a lot of people are familiar with. I mean, obviously people understand that minerals are important. That's why I usually try and drink some good water or have some good food. But that idea of, like, one, how would you be depleted or deficient of certain minerals? Maybe even what are minerals? Why are they important? And how can you bring a balance back to that?
Totally. So the way I like to look at minerals is that they're really like the spark plug of everything in life, right? Like so many processes, especially enzymatic processes in our body, are dependent on minerals, and not just minerals, but minerals in perfect ratio. So I'm sure everyone at some point in their life has heard, we are magnesium deficient, we should take magnesium, or something of that extent, right? Which is it's a newer way of looking at things. And also it's a very black and white thing to look at it in that way, because right, we have to figure out, well, why did we become magnesium deficient, which yes, EMFs and all the things, but also magnesium doesn't work in isolation in the body. The body is actually very intelligent, and it likes to have minerals in very specific ratios. So what we tend to see is that people who take only magnesium, for example, that will then affect their sodium ratio or their sodium balance in the body, which will then eventually have a negative effect on the thyroid and the adrenals and things like that. So whenever we take one thing in isolation, it's going to impact all these other systems in the body. And that's why I think supplementation is such an art form, and there's so much that we don't know about supplementation, which is why I usually tell most of my clients, if they come in with a whole laundry list of supplements that they have been taking for the last few years and they feel bad, I kid you not how many times I've just said to people, stop taking everything for 2 weeks or a month, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to feel so much better and my energy is coming back, because they don't understand that the very thing that they were deficient in for a while, right? Magnesium, for example, right? They're taking magnesium, which, yes, we can all be chronically deficient in magnesium and also already have a low sodium to magnesium ratio. So now whenever we take magnesium, that ratio will go down even further, right? So yes, you might feel temporarily better from this thing, whether it's vitamin C, whether it's magnesium, whether it's calcium. You're like, ooh, I get a boost in energy. I sleep better. My muscles feel better. I recover better. And then suddenly down the line, 2-3 months later, you are not as productive at work. You have some brain fog. You're noticing you're not as resilient in the gym. And so we have to understand that unless you know exactly where your minerals are at, and I'm not saying based on labs, because blood work is very much unreliant in those realms of the way in which my teachers and I look at these things, because what the body does, kind of like the blood is like the last stage of the disease. So there's this whole process that has happened before your blood became deficient in certain minerals. That was kind of like a multiple year process leading up to that, because the body likes to keep the blood levels very tight, right? Which is why often I get clients that say, hey, my labs are normal, I feel horrible. And we can do deeper testing, like hair tissue mineral analysis is a great example that we use for mineral balancing, that actually can reveal these patterns years before they even show up in the blood. Like we can see imbalances in the thyroid ratio, for example, and only years later would someone get diagnosed with things like hypothyroidism, or maybe they actually never get there, but they have the same symptoms of that. So the way I like to look at mineral balancing, and like I said, I've been on this journey for about 1.5 years that I've worked with mentors in the field and really have been consistent with my own mineral balancing journey. And I was very reluctant in sharing things for a while, because I don't like to share anything with my audience or my clients unless I've experienced significant results from that, because there's always new technologies and always new things that people will share about. But it just started making so much sense to me that when we work with the body on an elemental level, that it will impact the entire system. So it's kind of it doesn't really matter what symptoms you're experiencing, whether it's, again, the SIBO, the gut issues, the hypothyroid symptoms, blood sugar issues, blood pressure issues, brain fog, fatigue, Alzheimer's, all of these things somehow have a connection to your mineral ratios. And the way in which we can say it, it's the minerals don't lie, in the sense that they don't discriminate the physical stress, the emotional stress, whatever stress that a medication that you were on caused. They just reflect a stress pattern. You're going to see your hair test and it's going to say hey, there's been an extensive amount of stress, your body is in a burnout pattern, right? So it doesn't really discriminate your symptoms or how you got there. It's just, it doesn't lie. And so ultimately mineral balancing is the process of bringing those minerals back in balance in their ideal ratios. Of course, that it's a process that takes time, and it's not kind of once you're at the ideal ratios, or your symptoms are gone, but it's the idea of trying to get you as close to the ideal ratio as possible, because when you're at the ideal ratio, and we have to understand that how these minerals work together is that calcium is, for example, something that hardens things, right? We know there's calcification. Calcification hardens tissues. And then magnesium is something that really softens things, right? So we have these qualities to these minerals that if you have calcium that is more dominant than whatever its counterpart would be, like if we look at calcium, magnesium, for example, or calcium, potassium, then there's not enough of whatever that system regulates that can enter the cell when there's too much calcium, because it now hardens the cell. So that means that if, for example, thyroid hormone is supposed to get into the cell, but there's way too much calcium present, or calcium shell is what we can also say, is that thyroid hormone is not going to effectively enter the cell. So now there's not that proper conversion from T4 into T3, right? So we have those things of like understanding how the minerals affect all of the hormonal systems in the body. It affects our bile flow, right? It affects the consistency and like the integrity of our bile acid composition. It affects the integrity of the gut lining. It affects our cellular voltage. So we kind of understand that, again, no matter what caused that. And in my journey, I have done a lot of damage by like detoxing so much and cleansing and always doing juice cleanses and fasting and being on like a raw vegan diet for months at a time, and not understanding that I was over time really like doing damage to those mineral ratios, that then years later I'm like, oh, why are my symptoms back? Why do I feel adrenal fatigue? Why do I burn out? Why did I end up in the urgent care after the cleanses, right? It was because my system was in such a depleted state. So now I like to kind of like also kind of go into this idea that like we're talking a lot about minerals these days in terms of adding trace mineral drops to your water, or eating mineral rich foods, which are a great foundation, but they're not working with your specific mineral balance. So if your system has been stuck in fight or flight for a very long time, and you're in this like sympathetic dominance, like burnout pattern, you're not going to get out of that pattern unless you give the body very specific nutrients and very specific like adrenal glandulars, for example, or thyroid glandulars, to kind of balance the system out, to give it more energy so that it can then do its job of cleaning up whatever it didn't have the energy for. And it literally changed my life in the sense that I have done obviously years and years of work on my fertility, my hormones. I went from coming in with like extremely painful periods to, over the detoxification years, getting myself to a place of regular cycles, bringing back my, my cycle in general. I lost it for 5 years before that, and working with like getting to a level where they were pain-free and regular. However, I still had really low progesterone. So my estrogen was more dominant than my progesterone. It wasn't quite estrogen dominance, but I was like, how come everything I've done up to this point and all the detoxification, and I still have low estrogen, and I still had cold hands and feet, and I still had lower motility than most people, right? Like not complete bowel movements, or like needing some level of support. And there were still these things that like some days I still will need a little coffee, or I don't feel like my optimal self. And when I started working with mineral balancing, like the first thing that happened was my body got enough energy to dump a massive amount of aluminum. Like first retest that I got back was like a massive aluminum dump, which is kind of what we want to see, but not necessarily just the goal, because ultimately we're just giving the body energy to then do whatever it needs. So my body said, all right, gonna deal with this aluminum first. So during that first 3-month period of me being on mineral balancing, I was the most bloated I've ever been in this journey, like including when I had SIBO and things like that, because my body was dumping this aluminum, which temporarily, right, will change again, like the composition of your microbiome. It will trigger kind of like inflammation in the gut and things like that when you're detoxing. So I always tell my clients, it's not going to be a journey of like, oh, like it's going to be an easy ride. It's like, no, your body is going to go through a process when you're dumping heavy metals. And after that journey, I went actually to a place where I was like, my digestion's better than it's ever been in my life. I have no bloating. I can eat whatever I want. Like it's so easy right now. And I will have, and this is like a massive thing for me and for a lot of my clients. Like I went from having barely like 1 consistent bowel movement a day to like now usually having 2, having perfect motility, things like that, because my body went through that massive aluminum dump. And actually I have the minerals to build a healthy gut lining. And then the hormones were the next thing. So I went through an 8-month process of retracing all of my old hormonal issues. So that's what I said about retracing. The body gets energy back and it deals with a lot of that trauma. So most horrible periods I've ever had in my life for 8 months. And now it's settled down into a place where it's actually like really good and consistent. And I have high progesterone. I literally have perfect fertility, like the most fertile I've ever been in my life, from actually giving my body the energy back again through those minerals. And from this place, my body will likely go into deeper like metal dumps, right? So everyone's journey is going to look entirely different because you're essentially just working with retracing whatever your body couldn't or didn't have the energy for over the last years of your life. And so my previous partner, who's gone through it for about a year now, like his system just went only into metal detoxification. He's probably dumped like the biggest metal eliminations I've ever seen, both from mercury, because he had amalgam fillings for years, aluminum. He went through a massive copper dump recently. So his body was like just ready for it. And he just kept eliminating massive amounts. So yeah, everyone's journey is extremely different, but the way in like why I know it works so well is because you're not pulling anything from the body. And you're also not saying, here's your general protocol, follow it. It's like you retest every 3 months, and you formulate the supplementation specifically based on what their body needs to ultimately just get back into balance. And then the ratios will shift and you take something different to come back into that balance. And it just makes perfect sense for me, because if we kind of go from this idea that the body needs to feel safe in order to detox, it's the ultimate level of safety by just giving it all of its nutrients to then just give it the power to do whatever it wants to do and was designed to do. So did that explain it enough?
Yeah. Yeah. And what is that process of testing or diagnosing? How does that look? And then what are the actual things that you're working with? Like what are those substances of the minerals that you're taking in?
Yeah, so it's all based on HTMA testing. So you basically just send in a little bit of hair from the root, and they can see all of your mineral patterns in essentially like the last 3 months worth of hair. So about an inch and a half. And that's what you will resend in every 3 months. So as your body is changing, that will come out in the hair, like those mineral patterns. And that's what the whole plan is made up based on. So it usually starts with very similar foundations. So everyone is on a calcium and magnesium blend in those perfect ratios that I said. And sometimes even when a client is not ready for mineral balancing yet, I will just put them on the CalMag, very specific ratios. So not your average CalMag supplement that you get at Whole Foods or at like a drugstore. Like it's a very specific amount with specific cofactors like K2 and boron and vitamin D to really get your system into that level of balance. And then you work with liver support with like ox bile and things like that to really support your liver during the process of detoxification. Same with kidney support. And then you have very specific minerals based on what your body needs. So right now, my body is in a state in which I just got back into what's called slow oxidation, which is where about 75 to 80% of the population is in, where the system is kind of too slow. Like the adrenal output is a little sluggish, the thyroid's a little sluggish. And so what I'm taking right now is adrenal glandulars is one part of it, with like other sort of like herbal components that really help speed up the system, like ginseng and cordyceps, ashwagandha. So these really help balance the adrenals. And it's also the reason why I'm really not a fan of like nootropics and the whole world, because if I were to take this exact supplement with cordyceps, ashwagandha, ginseng, all of these things 3 months ago when I was in fast oxidation, it would have sent me over the edge into massive panic attacks because my system was already too fast, right? So we have to be really careful with like specific nootropics and like even like functional mushrooms, because our systems respond different to it at different stages of our lives. So that's one thing that I'm taking. And then there's a specific formulation for slow oxidation where it's just B vitamins with a little bit of zinc and other, it's basically kind of like a multivitamin specifically formulated for the stage in which I'm in. taking a little bit of zinc, some iodine, some selenium. So it's a very basic mineral program where you're just taking mostly mineral isolates and like maybe 1 or 2 formulas that are a bit more of a blend. But they always correlate to the exact like state that you're in. And so when I was in fast oxidation, I actually needed more copper to really drive down. So we kind of learn about these antagonistic elements, like copper and zinc are antagonistic. So that means that if you put one in, the other one goes down. So if you, for example, like many of us and myself included, whoever is listening, I'm saying you, like if you are on liver supplements, right? Like something like, oh, I'm going to take beef liver capsules, which is a very trending thing. They are very high in copper. So most people don't realize, my clients included. I had a client recently who like didn't tell us that she was going to be taking these beef liver capsules alongside our program. And about 2 months in, she's like, I'm having massive hair loss. I'm like, well, what are you taking? And she was taking a lot of those beef liver capsules, which are really high in copper. So that's going to drive down the zinc in your body. And zinc is correlated with hair loss. And so the moment that she stopped with those capsules, her hair stopped falling out, right? So we really have to understand that everything we take, including what we eat, including, right, like the nutraceuticals or like food-based supplements, have an impact on our oxidation rate, have an impact on like how our bodies process and even absorb certain nutrients. And so it's why I'm just, there's a part of me that's very frustrated by the whole like industry of like influencers just telling you like, just take these supplements because they're going to work for everyone, because it couldn't be further from the truth. Like what's going to help you might hurt someone else because their body isn't ready for that. And what happens if it does help you, but you're taking it for multiple months? Maybe now you've shifted in a different pattern and it's actually hurting you. So yeah, mineral balancing really helps us eradicate that question of like, well, what should I be taking? So in that process, we rarely look at replacement like theory. So like in mineral balancing, same with like germ theory and terrain theory, you have replacement theory, which is essentially you get to go to the doctor, you get your labs done. They say, you're low in iron, you're low in zinc, you're low in vitamin D. So what do you get sent home with? You get sent home with iron, vitamin D, and zinc. But what they don't understand is that for your body to get to that iron deficiency, likely that had to do with your ceruloplasmin. So it actually like, we need to look at the copper and all these other things, because if you focus on that, the body will naturally be able to actually properly turn that like the iron absorption and like transference back on. So it's a completely different look. They don't really look at blood work, but I have seen my blood work shift so much from doing this and actually neglecting kind of what the doctors would tell me and say, oh, you need to take these things because you're deficient in it. And like a few months later, all of those deficiencies are balanced out because I'm giving my body what it actually needs based on that, like, on the mineral balancing principle. So for anyone that's interested in looking into that, it's based on Dr. Paul Eck's work and Dr. Wilson. They have like great resources online. It's like a whole, it's like a whole rabbit hole that you can go into. There's tons of podcasts on it as well. And of course it's something that I do with my clients, but definitely recommend, like if you kind of are one of those people that like, hey, my labs look normal, or I have iron deficiency, or I have this, but like nothing really helps. Like that tends to be such a great answer.
One of the things early on you mentioned that I believe you said had such a significant impact on you was this idea of somatics, and it's how you look at a lot of things now. I think that's a term more people are familiar with. I mean, up until recently, it wasn't something I think that was in the vernacular. How do you describe somatics? Like, what are the benefits of that you've seen in yourself, that you've seen in your clients, and why for you has that had such a big impact?
Oh, this is such a loaded question because, so first of all, the way I look at somatics, so soma stands for the body, right? So we kind of like start to understand that like ultimately somatic work, which there's so many different branches of that, right? We have somatic dance, we have somatic therapy, we have parts work. So somatics ultimately just refers to like feeling through the body some experience. And so it can be like being in your body and dancing from that and like releasing emotions from that place. But the way in which I really integrate it into my practice is through the lens of emotional release, internal family system. So understanding that we have different parts within our psyche that sometimes take place quite literally in specific parts of our body, and that we can communicate through the body with our subconscious. And so for me, why this had such a massive impact is to really understand, like, why do I have certain tension patterns, or why when I feel like someone is like pissing me off, or someone is like, you know, making me feel really small, why do I feel like a pit in my stomach? Why do I feel this tension in my shoulders when I get angry, right? So we actually start to learn the language of the body and talk through the body with like parts of our subconscious or parts of our psyche that either are connected to like younger parts of us that weren't fully integrated, or that were repressed, or that weren't able to speak up when we were a child, all the way into, you know, having literal conversations with like loved ones that were passed, or having past life experiences, having conversations with like other beings through the body. And so it's so powerful in the sense that, you know, I've had clients, for example, come to me with PCOS or endometriosis, and they've done everything. They've done the surgery, they've done the functional protocols, they've done the whole like, you know, like berberine, lower blood sugar, like all of those things, and nothing worked. And it wasn't until, of course, we also worked with liver flushes, but we won't go there. But it wasn't until she went into her ovary and literally communicated with like, what do you perceive there? And the easiest way to do this is like, for your listeners, if they're very new to this, just closing your eyes and to just start to imagine whatever body part you want to talk to or with. It's like, in your mind's eye, what does it look and feel like? And maybe she can start to say like, oh, I'm seeing this like black balloon, and it's kind of like taking up this whole space. And like, you're kind of dropping into this deep meditative state in which perception is just a lot different from perception that we have with our eyes, right? And she was just starting to share like all of these colors that she was seeing. And we went really deep into kind of unraveling where that was coming from. And ultimately, we ended up in this whole journey where she saw like the 9 generations of women before her that weren't able to express their truth, their like sexual desires, and how that was all repressed in her body. And when we actually started to release that from her body by working with her voice and working with expression and having her go through this like full emotional release, is when her pain started clearing up like crazy. Like, she went from like really long cycles to, I think it was like a 35-day cycle with a pain-free ovulation for the first time in years, like within like 1 or 2 months of us just starting to connect the physical and the emotional. And in my own journey, I mean, we can talk for literally 3 hours about the things that I've seen in my own journey, and like all the way to one very memorable experience, which is a more recent one, where I was on a cleanse, and it was like the night of day 3 of the cleanse, and I started feeling like all this energy moving through my body, and I was like, oh, I need to like go into process. Like, I now know when my body is like, hey, all right, we need to go in and like have an experience. And I went into this meditation, and I felt like all this heat moving and like feeling tingling sensations over my body, and I started like dry heaving. Like, there was all this energy coming up, and I was like, this does not feel good. And I was getting nauseous, and I was just giving permission to this energy to move. And in my mind's eye, I saw the very moment that this energy attached into my body. I like saw an old relationship and like things that that person was doing that were like very unsanitary. And in that moment, I like went through this full release energetically. And it was really, really destabilizing to my nervous system at the time. And the first thing that happened the next morning is I woke up and I released a parasite like this big in the toilet. And so that was really when I started seeing like, oh, when we're having these physical experiences, these like energetic releases through the body, like through that somatic experiencing, we can actually shift the physical body. We can shift that terrain that created the parasite. We can really work with like, you know, like why is our diaphragm locked up, for example, like changing our breath patterns by actually understanding like, oh, when I was a child, I didn't feel safe in my body, and like my muscles have that memory, and therefore I'm having these breath patterns, or I'm having the nervous system be in this state of unsafety. And so I personally think like, and I hear it so many times, people who have done like years of therapy and they finally go into somatic work and they're like, oh my gosh, I just released like more than I've done in 5 years of therapy combined. And it's because we're not thinking our way through what was the trauma, how do I feel about it. It's like, no, we're actually going into what does the body feel? Well, the body feels numb because it's been locking away the emotions. Great. Now let's talk to the part of you that feels numb and that's trying to protect you, right? So we're going to these layers of the self that we can communicate with to ultimately like free up more energy. And it's really miraculous.
So kind of starting to wrap things up, we spoke in the beginning about this idea of the power of the mind. And even I remember one of, if not my main teacher, who does a lot of work with plants. It was very fascinating because I remember the mother of a friend of mine came, and she was very advanced in cancer. And the first thing he said is you have to believe that you're not sick. And there's a lot of ways of taking that. I mean, there's a lot of ways people can look at that. And I don't think it's to say that, like, nothing is wrong or there's nothing to be done, because obviously that's why the person is there.
Right.
But I think, as you alluded to in the beginning, it is like even part of that idea of like a terrain theory is that what you believe is creating a certain environment. And if we believe we're sick, even that, like, there's different ways of how we could view something like that. Like, one is to become really depressed or anxious or a feeling of a lack of empowerment. And another, which is perhaps more healthy, is not that I am sick, like that's part of who I am, but maybe something is out of balance, or these actions or these patterns that I've been doing have led me to here, which means that there's a way out. And now I'm going to begin to take those steps. Even as you said, like, a lot of our ways of looking at illness are very, I think if you look maybe in more archetypal masculine, feminine ways, they do tend to be more archetypally masculine in the sense of, like, it's very rational. Like,
Right.
this exists because of this one thing. And if I just put more of this one thing into my body, I'll be fine. Or if I take out this one thing in my body, then I'll be fine. And these more kind of fluid ways, these somatic ways, or ways that can arise from plant medicine, which I think even at the most fundamental level is not a rational path. I mean, it's usually bypassing the rational mind. Or these ideas of going in, empowering myself through detoxification, through, okay, like where are these things coming from? Why are they there? How can I work with that? What is your sense of, I think one of the really interesting things you're doing is really, like, studying different paths. And we live in a fascinating time where we have that ability. And obviously, like everything, there can be a downside to that, because we can be, a jack of all trades and a master of nothing. Although, interestingly, I just learned this the other day, the saying of that, because we often use that kind of pejoratively or maybe even like a bit of a self-deprecating way. But actually the end of that quote is something very empowering. Like, I forget exactly what it was, but it's essentially saying that's the better way. Like, to be a master of one thing is actually not necessarily the best. And I think that is very true. I mean, I look at my great-grandfather, who was an osteopath and a physician, and I've said this, I think, a couple times on the podcast, but when I lived in New York, I was practicing jujitsu. I mean, I still practice, but at that time I was practicing in Times Square, and I broke my nose one class, and I went to the local hospital somewhere near there, and they couldn't fix my nose. And I was just thinking, like, this is insane. Like, this is the best hospital in the best city in the entire world.
Right.
But the exact specialist wasn't there at that time. And there's like thousands of people there, and not a single one knew how to fix a broken nose. And I was just reminded of my great-grandfather, where if you broke your nose, you went in, and 2 minutes later, it was done. Like, because he had that knowledge. Like, his knowledge wasn't so specified in one thing that he wasn't able to see things in a more general way. And Really interesting man. I mean, he also cured sleeping sickness before there was even a cure for that, through kind of back tracing the causes of that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is I think it's really fascinating that you are studying all these paths, because I think that is a much more holistic way of seeing health. And yet at the same time, like so much, I think of where we do maybe struggle or fall short is this idea of the power of the mind, and how that can really shape our being. And these aren't new like philosophies. I mean, these are very ancient ways. I mean, know thyself, the power of the mind, the power of your thoughts to create. I mean, these are like the origin myths of cultures all over the world. Where do you see kind of, because you've used this term like health or the wellness industry, and it's constantly changing, it's constantly adapting, growing. Where do you see health moving? Like, where do you see from yourself, from the people you work with, which I think working with people is such an amazing thing, because you do begin to see yourself reflected through people. You begin to recognize patterns. You get to see other people's life stories. Do you have a sense of like where this is moving, like whether it's in some indefinite future, even more in the near term future? Like what are things that you've been feeling or kind of seeing the direction of all of this moving? I know that's a huge question, but
yeah. I mean, I'll speak to like where I would want to see it moving and where I do believe eventually it'll move to. I don't know what it's going to take or like the percentage of people that will be on board with this, but I'm just seeing the need for like really embodied practitioners in the way that like, the majority of practitioners do what they do because they've learned from a textbook. It's like, oh, I've learned about your disease or your condition in a textbook, so here's the protocol that's for you. And where I think, a lot of my clients trust me is because I had to go on this path. Like, if I had to write out every single condition I was diagnosed with at some point in my journey, from like heart conditions to panic attacks to like all sorts of like crazy nervous system issues and like food intolerances and things like that, it's like people trust me because I've been through it and I've gotten to the other end of it. And like, I'm always very transparent of the things that I'm still learning, and I'm still that's the kind of the thing of like the wounded healer archetype. It's right. We kind of overcome our own wounds in order to become right, like this healer. And I personally think that it's really what the world is moving towards, of these people that have actually walked the path, that are embodied, and not someone who's in a doctor's office who's telling you to eat better, but they're overweight because they're going to McDonald's after their shift, right? It's like who, and this is really a principle that I really live by. Like, no matter who I choose to work with, whether it's in business, whether it's in like my health, whether it's like whatever, are these people that are at the place that I want to be? Like, if I follow their lead, like, will they take me to the trajectory that I want to go to? And if the answer is no, then why would I follow anything they say? Because their advice clearly got them to where they are today. And so, yeah, I just really believe that, really like that, like jack of all trades kind of thing, where like more and more people will start to blend these different modalities and to actually start to bring together this idea that like, you cannot treat the physical without working on the emotional. And you cannot treat the emotional or work with the emotional if you disregard the energetic. And that's personally where I think health will move towards, where we're just going to get these like specialists, or like even schools, which is obviously kind of like my goal in the future, is to like do practitioner trainings and to like collaborate with coworkers in the space to actually like create a robust program that like teaches people about detoxification, but also somatics and the nervous system, and like all of these very delicate topics that people don't really bring in together too much. And so my hope for the world would just be that there's people like myself who have walked the path and continue to walk the path. I mean, I'm only 28, so I can only imagine in 30 years from now, like what my path will have looked like then, and to like teach from that embodied space. But to just have people that are actually like empowering individuals, that are bringing back like the ancient medicine and the ancient way of looking at health and the body way before we went into this whole like, industrialization and like this like very much like capitalism and how can we make more money from this, but actually going back to like the indigenous ways and like going into like ceremony when you have specific things, or like going into prayer and like, you know, going to like the local family doctor, and to really bring that back would be my very hope, right? So how long will it take us to get there? I'm not sure. It depends on, you know, like how fast this mass awakening will continue to happen, but I definitely have high hopes for that.
Great. And final question, now that you're in Texas, have you embraced your full patriotic American side and left behind your old antiquated European ways?
Definitely not. No, definitely not. I mean, you know, it's so funny because like it's just like such a funny balance to come from like the European and then come here and to just like find my own journey with that. And I think I will always be able to stand in both. Like I'm never like, especially when it comes to politics, like I am so unopinionated on certain topics because I'm like, I'm just going to pave my own path. And like, they don't really follow the rules of either of those. And like, I do what's true to me. And like, some people are really going to disagree with that and some people are not. But like, you know, it's like, I really like to connect to people on like a human to human level. And like, that means that at certain stages of my life, like things are going to be true and present that like certainly a few years after they're not going to be present. And so, yeah, when it comes to that, like, I just ask myself the questions, like, what phase of life am I in? And sometimes like, I definitely like, yeah, like I'm very much into terms of like the patriarchal, you know, like world. And other times I'm very much in the opposite of that. And like, I think, you know, in this current phase of life in which I'm in, like, I'm definitely like, I'm seeing like, oh, beautiful. Like the world of capitalism has like beauty in it as well, where like I can like build this business and like create urgency and then create like, there's like these beautiful realms in which we get to play and like we get to just like see like how we work with the system, right? Like there's people that are so like anti the system and I'm going to do it my way and like I'm going to exit the matrix, and okay, great. But like, if we want to make an impact on the people that are in the system, we have to play the game and we have to like be, you know, be anchored in both worlds. So yeah, I kind of like to be fluid in that sense as well, where like, you know, I'll probably end up on a farm somewhere in a different country with like all of my community. But right now I'm very much playing in this game and I'm very much paying my taxes and doing all the things that are, you know, asked of me to be in this game. So yeah.
Great. Well, we're over 2 hours. That went by very quickly. If people are interested in working with you, maybe can you just briefly describe kind of how that looks, how they reach you, and what's the best way to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a very easy system. So first of all, my Instagram is just my first dot last name. My website is my first and last name.com. So evahooft.com. And I really just typically have 3 ways in which people like to work with me. They either, I have a free webinar that's always up and running where I kind of like go through a full free training of like, you know, what is the method I introduce? How does that work? So there's always free things for people to check out, whether it's on my Instagram or on my website. Then I have a course available as well for people that want to learn this kind of stuff. They want to understand how they can start to make those changes, but they don't need the full guidance, you know, especially people that are just great learners on their own time. And then I have a group program that I actually just switched to an evergreen model. So we're going to be running that all the time, where you're just guided through that full process for 6 months. So you'll come in, you will talk to one of our coaches, and we'll actually build out a full protocol for you. So including, right, like whether it's mineral balancing, whether it's working with liver detoxification, like working on gut support, and we go in stages that really honor your nervous system, your body. And then of course, for the people that really want to do one-on-one with me, I open up very select slots for that as well at any given time. So there's an actual application page on my website for people in that sense. So yeah, if you're someone who like really wants specific guidance, or you want like, in my one-on-one clients, I really bring in like the somatics, the astrology. So we go really, really deep in terms of like spiritual mentorship as well, rather than just physical. But you also get a little bit of that in the group programs because we bring in somatics, and we have amazing somatic teachers that are part of the community. So yeah, that's what I would say. And anything can be found on the website.
Well, amazing. Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. And I hope some people reach out to you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work you're doing, just sharing so candidly about your journey and all you've learned. I think it's super beneficial, super inspiring, and just, as you said, being an example for people to really experientially change. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right, everyone. That's it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. For me, it was really a pleasure to sit down and speak with her. She speaks really well. She has, I think, a wealth of knowledge. And as I said, I think it's really a testament to her work and just everything she's doing. I hope you enjoyed that. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, Patreon is a really amazing way. I really like that website because it's built off this idea of reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining something from this podcast, it's an amazing way to give back. As always, thank you to all the people supporting that way. It really allows me to continue making these episodes. And if you're able to do that, thank you so much in advance. Also, as always, helping with the algorithms really helps. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video. And if you're listening to this on the popular platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, leaving a star rating and a short review is also super helpful. Also, as I mentioned in the intro, if you're interested in working with myself, my colleague Marav Artsy, we have our 2026 calendar up. So if you're interested in exploring more about plant medicines, healing, these wisdom traditions, that's a really amazing way. We have a number of dates up for next year. And if you'd like more information about that, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope this finds you all well, and I will see you all on the next episode.
Dung.